video we're going to be looking at the application of contrast, and specifically going to be looking at the application of contrast to get nice smooth finishes. Now don't worry, we are going to be actually using a model for this one as well, but we're first going to discuss the theory of it using this piece of palette paper. Now the colour we're going to be using is Talisar blue, but before we get there we're going to be talking about brushes. Now brushes are a very important part of painting, which is not something that needs to be said, but I've said it anyway. We can put that one on a mug. So, when painting with contrast paints, the most important thing is control. Now, to get the best control out of it, it means that you need to have a brush size with which you're comfortable, but you also need to have a brush that's not designed to hold loads and loads of paint. Now, this is a bad example of a brush, but this is a shade brush. Now, I use this to basically dust off miniatures or kind of just do really large mixes should I need to, but for example, I can dust off this model that we're going to be working on very shortly, which is a Crimson Fists Primaris Captain. So the reason I don't use brushes like shade brushes is because shade brushes are designed to hold lots of paint at once, lots of very runny paint. They're designed for shading. And well, we don't want that with contrast, because when you have too much paint on the brush, that's when you get dark patches, that's when you get blobs, and you have too much paint with which to work, and it can be very difficult to rescue something when you've used too much paint rather than having not enough paint or not enough shade, although both are pretty disastrous when it comes to contrast painting. So that's why for the majority of the miniatures that I paint, I will generally use medium layer or small layer brushes. This is because I've got lots of control with these brushes. I know where I am with these brushes. Now the medium layer is really good for anything kind of this size and bigger, whereas the small layer brush is really good for anything kind of this size and smaller. So what we're going to get into now is how much paint should you have on your brush when you're applying your contrast paint. Now, depending on the detail of which you're painting, this is very important. When you've got lots and lots of detail, for example, on an organic structure, or in a kind of really craggy feature, for example, like a sanguinary guard wing, or a seraphon hide. This is less important, because when you've got lots and lots of recesses, the paint will run directly into them. It's designed very much for that kind of thing. That doesn't mean it can't be used for smooth surfaces, because it absolutely can, but for those kind of much more kind of craggy features, this is perfect. You don't really have to worry too much about how much paint you have on your brush. Obviously there is a thing as having too much or not enough, but it's less important when you're painting features such as those. However, when you're painting smooth finishes, this is absolutely crucial. I'm going to demonstrate what can happen if you don't have enough paint, or if you have too much paint. Not on the model, because I don't want to ruin it, but on this piece of palette paper. Now, as I said, we're going to be using Talisar blue. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my brush in here, and I'm going to grab a nice big fat dollop of it. Now this right here is too much. As you can see, it's starting to form a drip at the end. If I do this, eventually it is going to drip. This is way too much paint. And when we've got too much paint, what will happen is you'll get a nice dark blob. And this is something that a lot of people are generally kind of running into. And so what we're going to do, when we've got too much paint, you're just going to start painting things on, right? So we'll do it around here. So with our too much paint on our brush, that's what you get. You get this kind of really dark here, and you get this really kind of scratchy finish over here, because you kind of blow your load all at once. And then you kind of try and move it around to rescue it, but it's already too late at that point, because you've already started with far too much paint. Now, when you don't have enough paint on your brush, that's how you get a scratchy finish. So I'm going to wash that brush. And I'm going to grab a small amount like this. And then I'm just going to kind of take some of that off. So if I kind of get just a little bit on my brush, I'm going to kind of so just pretend that this is my armor piece as well. And now I'm going to start painting it. See, it's all washed out and it's not really doing the trick. And that's how you get an all scratchy finish. It doesn't have the kind of the depth and richness that you want from contrast paint. It's just, it's neither is desirable. So what we're going to do is wash that brush again. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the optimum amount of paint to have on your brush. So that is too much. So what we then do is we just use the edge of the pot to just scrape it off a little bit, just kind of dabbing at the edge of the pot, until we get to roughly around about that much. And then what we can do is we can start doing our brush strokes. There we go. So that's the perfect kind of color. However, it's not the perfect kind of finish. Now this is because of the way that I was painting. And this is very, very important. Having the right amount of paint on your brush is important, but the way in which you do your brush stroke is equally as important. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to close that Talisar pot and I'm going to give it a good shake again, because we've used a fair whack of the paint. Give it a good shake, make sure that those pigments are nice and mixed. Now, one of the most important things is your style of brush stroke, particularly when it comes to smooth surfaces. What you want to do is you want to stick towards the tip of the brush, and you don't want to use tons of pressure. You want to glide across the surface to get that nice smooth brush stroke. You want to go nice and methodically. So what we do is we once again just grab our paint on our brush, like that sort of amount, again, maybe a tiny little bit more. And then we want to kind of, as I say, we want to glide across the surface. You want to be very, very careful. You just want to kind of make contact and then just glide across like that. Let's go next to it and just glide across. Obviously it's not perfect because I'm doing this on a flat piece of paper. You see how I'm getting a nice smooth finish because I'm just sticking to the tip of the brush. I'm just very, very, very gently gliding across that page. Now, it's not perfect again because it's a large open space, and generally you're not working on panels this thick without any, well, this large, without having any medium involved. Now, if you do have medium involved, it becomes a lot easier to do this kind of thing. But what that does mean is it does mean that your paint becomes a little bit thinner. So it just means that you might have to do a second coat of it. So as I've demonstrated before, this is what happens when you attack the model. You get this kind of finish, or you get this kind of finish. So this is not enough paint, and this is too much paint, but this is just kind of just getting it on there like you would normally with a layer paint or a base paint. You kind of always see these kind of videos where, you know, for example, we're going to use some Galvaback red here, but what they'll do is they'll kind of take the paint on the brush, put it on the palette, and then they'll just grab a tiny bit of water, get it nice and thin, and then they go, right, now we're going to get this on the model. And the brush strokes that you see are this kind of thing, because they're going to do they're going to do two layers to really build that color up. Whereas if you do two layers With contrast, you're not building the color up per se, you're actually enriching the color. And that's what we're going to demonstrate now. So this is our paint where, well, let's do it with this one. This is our paint where we got that kind of just right mix. If we then decide that we're going to do a second layer over the top of that, what you'll see is because of the translucent nature of the paint, it's still going to show up the Thalasar blue layer below. So what we do is we just do a line going across the other side, the other direction. You see? Now you can see on this side, you've got one tone of Thalasar blue, you've got darker here, and you've got lighter on this side again. Similarly on either side here. If I do it here, it's enriched, but you've got a nasty finish underneath it. So what we'll do is just grab a little bit more, we'll put this over the top, like that. So this is why it's important to go quickly when you're doing your Thalasar blue, or doing any contrast paint, because if you take too long, or you let it dry even a little bit, you see that line just there? That's what happens. As the contrast dries, it starts to formulate what that tone is going to be. And if you disturb it or you go over it, you get a darker line because of it. It works very much like highlighter pens do. So what we're now going to do is we're going to do this on the model. And you're going to see all of this in action. So we wash that brush. We'll move this palette out of the way. And we'll get a little closer with the camera. So, knowing what we know about contrast paints, in terms of how translucent they are, how to apply them, how much paint to have on our brush, this is in fact a Crimson Fist Captain, and he needs to be that nice dark blue. He wants to be this kind of blue, like that. However, this colour it's not Leviathan blue. It is Leviathan blue, but it's not Leviathan blue on its own. Because of the translucent nature of contrast paints, if we go straight in with the paint, it will still have that kind of grey seer-esque quality to it, which is not a problem, but for the armour we want it to be nice and blocked in and smooth, just like it is here. So what we need to do is, that means we need to do a pre-shade, and because of that translucent nature of the paint that we put on second will still show up the properties of the first paint. So this is why I use kind of a pale blue first, and then a darker blue afterwards. So I'm basically really enriching that blue with another blue. So what we're now going to do is we're going to apply some paint to this guy, and we are going to be using that Thalasar blue, same as before. And I am using this medium layer brush, because at this point it doesn't matter about being neat. And actually what I am going to do is I'm just going to pop that shield off just for a moment, just to make it a little bit easier to film, so I can show you what's happening. So what we do is we make sure that we've got the right amount of paint on our brush, which is around about that. And you're going to see it's a lot easier than it is on the palette paper, because there are recesses on areas on the model. So we're just going to go under here, and we're just going to use the tip of our brush to start moving that contrast paint around. Now having those recesses is important, because it does give that paint somewhere for it to run into. When it doesn't have that, it just sits on the armor panel, which is why it's so tricky to paint this stuff over flat armor panels, because there's nowhere for the paint to go, so it just kind of sits there, which is a little bit awkward, and it's not what we want at all. But as you can see, just using that tip of the brush, we've got a nice smooth finish on that foot. We can come underneath here, make sure we get right around the corner, like so. Similarly, knowing what we know about contrast paints, is we want to go reasonably quickly, but we want to be methodical with it, which is why we're using that tip of our brush. And then we're just gliding across the surface, making it nice and smooth. So for example, on this flat area here, so this is going to be a little bit trickier because there's nowhere for that paint to run into. So we want to start at the closest recess, which is down there. We just want to pull the paint across the surface using the tip of the brush. Preferably without leaving the model, like so. Now it's in that nice stage where it's still a little bit wet, so what we can do is we can just mop up if there's any dark blobs. Now I fortunately don't have any dark blobs there because I followed my own advice. But what I want to try and avoid now that it's finished, it's been about sort of 10-15 seconds, so I want to try and avoid going anywhere near that, because if I do, I'm going to get a blob. So I'm going to wash my brush. And you want to wash your brush quite frequently, because if you're just using the tip of the brush, the paint will start to dry or it'll start to collect in there, and you don't want it to do that. Because if you, for whatever reason, get a little too much and it kind of reactivates that stuff that's hiding in the dark of the brush, it will come out blobby. So you just want to frequently wash the brush. So once again, just going nice and steady, very gentle, using the tip of the brush across these smooth surfaces, trying to kind of go around the recesses so that the paint has somewhere to run into. It's very easy on very kind of detailed and organic surfaces with lots of grooves, because it just naturally does that all over that section of the model. But on the edges like this, it doesn't have anywhere for it to go. So what we're going to do is just going to keep going. Now at this point, I've got still a little too much on the brush. Again, just tap on the edge of the pot and keep going. Very methodical, very careful, using the tip of the brush. This is getting a nice smooth surface for our paint. We're trying not to disturb those areas once they're done. That's too much paint. Because we don't want to break the skin that it's formed. Like so. So now we're going to come down and do this side as well. Like that. Now hopefully we've got quite an easy thing here, because we've got lots of nice recesses for the paint to run into. But once again, just trying to stick to the tip of the brush and trying to stay on the model as much as possible. On that panel. So you see, it's got a nice smooth finish again. Because this is one of the other dangers that you run into, is that if you haven't got enough paint on the brush, you won't be able to finish that section. If you can't finish that section, you have to get more paint, and once you have to get more paint, you're running the risk of it drying, and you're disturbing and breaking that skin. Like so. Just do this back part of the leg. Got a very short window of opportunity. As you can see, it's already happened on my guy just here, because I wasn't quick enough. That's okay in this instance, because it's a pre-shade. We're going to go over it with a darker blue, but we'll just have to bear that in mind when we get there. I'm just going to keep going. And this arm here, we want to come around and very quickly just continue it like that. In this instance, I've actually blobbed on there, which I didn't want to do. So now I need to come on and do this, do the shoulder pad, so as to get a nice smooth finish on that shoulder pad. Now shoulder pads are quite tricky to do this on. Because they don't have the greatest amount of resources and they're very prominent. There we go. Oh, we've missed a tiny little bit on the inside here. And there we go. We've done another little blob just there, which we didn't want. So we now just need to come around here and do this section now, so as not to get any consistencies that we really don't want on certain details. Like, for example, the helmet, like, for example, the shoulder pad. Like so. This is the finished product, keeping to all of those principles of using the tip of the brush, balancing the amount of paint that we have on the brush, making sure we've not got a drip or it's not enough to make it scratchy and horrible. This is what we get. Really beautifully smooth power armor, and yeah, it looks absolutely cracking. If you enjoyed this video, you love the channel, and you want to support me further like these legends and bosses on the screen before you, you can do so. Head to patreon.com/warhipster or head to ko-fi.com/warhipster. Alternatively, you can now become a YouTube channel member by heading to the channel page and clicking on the join button just here, just like these absolute bosses have done. And if you just want to shoot me a little thanks, just because you really love this video, you can click on the thanks button just below this video. Don't forget to share it, like it, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And to make sure you stay up to date, don't forget to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Happy wargaming.